Let's take a trip to Paris in the rain. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my masculine feminine energies breakdown series with one of my favorite, more current day films, Midnight in Paris. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I talk about this in most of my videos, but a quick breakdown. Masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies, but we all have a core energy that's the energy we're most ourselves in. But we can tap into either energy whenever we need to. We can be in healed or wounded versions of either of these energies, and these energies also have archetypes, and we contain all of the archetypes, and we can tap into each of them whenever we need to. Our natural core energy oftentimes links up with our gender, but it doesn't necessarily have to. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need a masculine energy and a feminine energy in the relationship in order to attract. The same energies repel and opposite energies attract. So I've had some requests to do some more current films, and ironically I decided to pick my most favorite like modern day film, but ironically the film is actually one that takes place for most of the film in the 1920s. Midnight in Paris is a film from 2011, which now that I think about it is actually kind of old, but it's my favorite like actual modern day film, like from the 2000s on, I suppose you could say. God, I feel old even just saying that. But anyway, so it takes place in current day time, but very frequently the main character in the film actually travels back to Paris in the 1920s. They refer in this film to the idea of nostalgia being a like denial of the painful present, which makes people think that their lives would be better if it took place in a different time period.
Nostalgia is denial. Denial of the painful present.
Oh, well, Gil is a complete romantic. I mean, he would be more than happy living in a complete state of perpetual denial.
Really?
And the name for this fallacy is called golden age thinking.
Ah, touche.
Yeah, the erroneous notion that a different time period is better than the one one's living in. You know, it's a flaw in the romantic imagination of those people who find it difficult to cope with the present.
I definitely have nostalgia, I will tell you, and if you can't tell by the fact that most of the films I review are like from like the, you know, 40s, 50s, 60s, you can tell I definitely have nostalgia. But anyway, I also want to state, because this is the world that we live in, as much as I love this film, it was written and directed by Woody Allen, and I do absolutely adore and love this film, but I also want to make it very clear that I am in no way endorsing anything that Woody Allen does in his personal life. He's a very complicated personal life, and I'm not endorsing that at all. I just really love this film, so I want to make sure I get that out of the way. Midnight in Paris stars Owen Wilson as Gil. Gil is a kind of, he considers himself a Hollywood hack. He's basically been a screenwriter, he's very successful, but he feels like what he's been creating has been very superficial, and he really wants to write a novel and be like a great novelist, to be an artist. At least in his own mind, he wants to create what he believes is more art. He's engaged to Inez, who's played by Rachel McAdams, and they're actually visiting Paris with her family. Her father is doing a business deal there, and they've kind of gone along to Paris, and Gil has this fascination with Paris. He loves the romance of the city. Inez, all right, let's just get into Inez and we'll just get this out of the way. Okay, one of the big complaints that I hear about this film is that Inez is emasculating to Gil. And yes, she is. 100%. I don't want to get too much into the concept of emasculation in this video because I don't think this is the ideal example of it, but I will do another video about emasculation if you would like me to, if you'd like me to talk more about that topic, because I feel like there's other better examples of emasculation that you can see. Because while what Inez is doing, yes, is emasculating Gil, 100%, and we're going to dig into their energies in a second. However, I wouldn't call what Inez is doing as simply emasculation. Inez is verbally and psychologically abusive, 100%. Like, she is awful. She is just an awful person. In fact, I would very much argue the case that she is a prime example of a female narcissist. I would definitely say that she falls under the category of narcissistic personality disorder. I'm not just talking about somebody who's just in their ego, but she's actually just awful. I mean, she not only tears him down verbally, she gaslights him, she manipulates him, she uses him. She's no remorse for anything she does that could potentially hurt him. Like, she's no empathy or anything. So there are some like surface things that I'm going to talk about as far as the energy she's in and the energy he's in and things like that. But I want to make it very clear, for one, I don't justify anything that she does, because I think that what she's doing is abusive completely. So anytime I talk about the energies that they're in, I just want to make it very clear that what she's doing is abusive and it is not acceptable behavior. Their polarity is off 100%, and we're going to get into that, but this is not just a matter of they have polarity being off. Like, I actually do believe that she would qualify as having narcissistic personality disorder in a very extreme case, and that she's actually being verbally and psychologically abusive to him. But I do think that there's some good examples in here that we can learn from, even though this is an extreme example, and if anybody was ever in a situation like this, I would be like, okay, it's time to set some boundaries. So while Inez and Gil are, you know, in Paris, they run into Paul and Carol, who you find out, I believe they both, you know that Paul and Inez went to college together. I think Carol also was a part of that. I'm not sure if Paul and Carol are actually, like, if they're married or they're just dating. Like, it's they're a couple, but it's not really, you don't delve into their relationship too much. Although they refer to Paul a lot as pedantic. He is just classic egomaniac. Like, just so much needs to be better than everybody else. And while you don't dig too much into his relationship with Carol, and Carol is really just a side character, she's just here and there, there's actually a scene that I find very interesting, especially when we meet them. Especially, she does it throughout the film every time that they're together, but particularly when you first meet them, she has this air of somebody who's probably also dealing with the same kind of abuse that Gil is dealing with. You know, she'll say something, like she's really excited about it, and then she'll, like, look to Paul as kind of like, oh, did I say that right? Did I say it wrong? That kind of, like, subtle questioning yourself, especially in a dynamic where you have one partner who's very much in their ego. Again, a lot of subtle signs in here of some really serious abuse that's going on. As much as I love this film and I love so many aspects of it, there are some really subtle but really kind of dangerous, I would say, dynamics that are going on in some of these relationships. And I want to make sure that I'm clear that I am not justifying any of that stuff. So Inez is very taken with Paul, and it's an interesting thing because Paul and Inez are both very much in their egos, and I would actually say that both of them as characters are very much a wounded masculine. They have a very wounded masculine energy of, like, needing to be better than everybody else, needing to put other people down, needing to be in control, but not in a, like, healthy sense of leadership control, but in, like, a I'm in it for myself kind of control. All those things are very much wounded masculine energy. The needing to tear down others to make themselves look better, wounded masculine. Again, with Carol, you don't dig too much into her character, but you do get the subtle impression that she is very much a wounded feminine. She's a follower. She, you know, doesn't really have very much self-confidence in herself, but she's really more of a side character that I think really just emphasizes how much of an egomaniac Paul is. Gil is very much, he's a lot of wounded feminine energy, just very common in artists in particular. Male and female artists have a tendency to, you know, you're sort of a creative types, very often can have a very wounded feminine energy to them, which tends to be perpetuated because that suffering tends to create art. I'm not saying that you need that in order to create art, but it's very common. Now, because wounded feminine energy tends to be very self-destructive, it tends to be very self-harming, very common for people in wounded feminine energy to get into abusive relationships. Particularly because opposites tend to attract. If you're a wounded feminine person of either gender, you're going to tend to end up being attracted or getting into relationships with people who also have a wounded masculine energy, regardless of gender. Gil is definitely a wounded feminine, and Inez is definitely a wounded masculine as far as their dynamics, right? We don't know exactly where their relationship started that got them to this point. Like, Inez is constantly putting Gil down, especially around Paul. She's always talking about how great Paul is, and then in front of Paul, she's always shooting down anything Gil says. She doesn't respect Gil's boundaries when he doesn't want to talk about something. She talks about Gil and, like, criticizes him while Gil's there, as if he's not even there, to other people, especially Paul.
Why don't you tell them about the lead character that you're working on right now?
Well, I don't like to discuss my work.
Well, you don't have to tell them the whole plot.
It'd be fun.
Just the character.
No.
Okay, he works in a nostalgia shop.
What's a nostalgia shop?
Oh, not one of those stores where they sell Shirley Temple dolls and old radios.
Oh,
I never know who
exactly.
buys that stuff. Who'd want it?
I don't know.
Well, people who live in the past. People who think that their lives would be happier if they lived in an earlier time.
And just which era would you have preferred to live in, Miniver Chibi?
Paris in the 20s, in the rain.
All these things, really, really toxic behavior. Gil never stands up for himself. There's different dynamics here. On the one hand, you could look at it as like, well, okay, if Gil had not been so passive, if he had actually stood up for himself and actually stepped into his masculine energy, maybe she would have stopped doing that. She may not have, depending on her wounding, because in this particular case, in many cases, if someone is a feminine cord being, which is very often the woman in the relationship, women typically are the more feminine cord person in the relationship. So if Inez had actually been feminine at her core, if she had been like testing him, and I have a video about feminine testing, but if she had been testing him to see what he was willing to put up with, she would keep doing that in order to like call him to like step into his masculine, his power, to stand up for himself. And she might have been doing that, but it doesn't appear that that's what she's doing. And he becomes more and more passive, and eventually a feminine partner, like if she was really feminine at her core, would eventually decide to get a new partner because he wasn't stepping into that energy, and he was just like continuously letting her abuse him, which would be really a big turnoff for someone who was a feminine cord being. But because she's got a very wounded masculine energy, and it's such a strong wounded masculine energy, she seems to really enjoy the abuse. She is so much in her ego, and she needs to tear him down to make herself feel better about herself, and is trying to always trade up to somebody else. Gil standing up for himself, it never really works with her, and which is really just a signal that it's the wrong relationship, to be honest with you. Inez is really more better suited to somebody like Paul. Not to say that they would have had a good relationship, but Paul needs someone who worships him. Inez appears to, at least currently, worship him, and Inez needs somebody that's a status on her arm, somebody, which, you know, is probably why she was attracted to Gil. Apparently he had a pretty successful Hollywood career, so he was a status partner for her, but she was just looking to move on to the next status, which would be, again, more wounded masculine energy of really just acting from ego and acting from always trying to one-up people and stuff. So now Gil is very much, he has a lot of feminine energy. It's very wounded, especially when he's with Inez, but he does carry a very strong feminine energy in him. But I think there are a few signs that he actually does have a masculine energy that is potentially, I would say he could very well be a masculine cord person. He does tend to be more balanced, I think. But there's an interesting dynamic when the two couples are actually out at this, you know, art museum looking at artwork, and there's a guide there who's a French guide who is leading them through the artwork, and Paul keeps interrupting her and telling her that she's wrong, and she gets to a point where she basically is like, no, I'm certain of this information, and Paul keeps telling her that she's wrong. And if you notice, this particular guide is, I mean, she's very grounded, she's very sure of herself, she's very confident, she's obviously very knowledgeable, but she's softer. She's a softer, more feminine energy. She doesn't have that angry, aggressive energy that Gil is used to with Inez. And so even though this guide, you know, she obviously can hold her own against this guy who's being really mean to her, Gil does step in that moment to defend her. It's subtle. I mean, it's just with words. It's not like an aggressive thing. I mean, Gil isn't a really super like aggressive guy, but he does shift into wanting to protect this woman because she is more feminine. And the masculine can sense when a feminine being needs protection or wants protection or is being threatened.
So much of Rodin's work was influenced by his wife, Camille.
Yes, she was an influence, though Camille was not the wife, but his mistress.
Camille? No.
Yes. Yes, Rose was the wife.
No, he was never married to Rose.
Yes, he did marry Rose in the last year of their lives.
I think you're mistaken.
Are you arguing with the guide?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, no, I'm certain, monsieur.
Yeah, actually, she's right.
Gil isn't going to have that same reaction with Inez because Inez is carrying so much masculine energy. Whereas this guide, having a more softer feminine energy called on Gil to bring forth more of his masculine energy. It's not going to be a really aggressive one. Gil isn't really used to using his masculine energy. He's used to being very passive, and he's used to being in a more wounded feminine. But the fact that when a softer, more feminine woman needs protection, that he is called to do that, just shows that he really has been looking to call on that masculine energy within him. It's just been so suppressed because he has been so abused by a wounded masculine partner. And even when Gil finds out that Inez and Paul are having an affair, and he calls her out, and he is very grounded, he's very determined, he's very stable. He has a lot of masculine strength. It's not like tough guy masculine strength like we usually think of when we think of masculine, but it's a very like grounded, centered, these are my boundaries, this is what's happening, very directional, this is my plan, this is what's gonna happen. And he steps into that energy, and Inez just gaslights him. I mean, this is like stereotypical gaslighting. She's deflecting, she's shifting the blame. She's cheated on him and she's shifting the blame to him.
Okay, yes! I did. I was with Paul for a few nights because he's romantic and he speaks French and you were always working, and maybe it's the mystique of this corny city, but get over it, Gil. You just put this in perspective when we get home.
I'm not going back.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm staying here, and it has nothing to do with, you know, your romantic fling. Paris is Paris. And as you and I, it's obvious I don't think we're right for each other.
What?
I think that...
What are you saying? What are you even talking about?
You know, she's still emasculating him, she's still tearing him down, she's still aggressive, and that's obviously the sign that him stepping into his version of masculine energy, like his masculine strength, is not gonna work with her, and that their relationship really has to end. And that this is just like classic narcissistic abuse behavior if you look at the scene. So what actually happens in the film, Gil is so much in denial about his reality that every night at midnight he gets transported into Paris in the 20s, and he gets to hang out with all kinds of artists and literary legends, and it just gets to hang out and experience Paris in the 20s, and it gives him so much inspiration. And you know, it's kind of like, is it really happening? Is it not really happening? There's all these like subtle clues as to like what's real and what's not. We never really find out fully, but we don't really need to know because we just get caught up. And to me, that's why I love this film so much, is getting caught up in the romance of being swept off to a different time and experiencing a different time period. So he meets a lot of really cool characters. There's a lot of big name celebrities in this movie, but I want to touch on a few of my favorite characters in this. He meets Zelda and Scott Fitzgerald, and I have to admit, I love Zelda Fitzgerald in this film. Like, she's not in it a lot, but I love her energy. I will admit she is a bit wounded feminine herself. She does end up in some pretty self-destructive behaviors. She reminds me a bit of Brigitte Bardot and God Created Women, which is the last film that I broke down. But like, if her character was from like Alabama, you know what I mean? Like, she's got that like Southern belle, but like she's just playful and fun. And Scott Fitzgerald is just sort of much more, he's a very grounded masculine. He's like the tree, and Zelda's like the storm that kind of happens around the tree, and Scott is just very stable and grounded and everything. I just love their dynamic. It's not the healthiest dynamic because she's obviously, you know, she's got a lot of wounding. She does get into some self-harm, and obviously has a drinking problem and stuff, but she's just flows with her emotions. She's just fun. Like, you don't really get a lot of her in this film, but she's just a fun character. I just really love her.
I know what you're thinking. This is boring. I agree. I'm ready to move on. Let's do Bricktop, Scott.
Bricktops?
I'm bored. He's bored. We're all bored.
We are all bored. Let's do Bricktops. Why don't you tell Cole and Linda to come with?
The character I really love in this movie,
Hemingway.
Ernest Hemingway in this film, is just, to me, he is just such a sexy masculine man. I gotta tell you, he's so grounded, he's so strong, and he's poetic in the way he speaks, but it's in a very like masculine poetry almost. It's just he's just so sure of himself, and even everything he says, it's like such the epitome of masculine energy, of like facing death and living in integrity and being noble, like all the things that you think of as far as healthy masculine energy.
Yes, it was a good book because it was an honest book. And that's what war does to men. And there's nothing fine and noble about dying in the mud, unless you die gracefully. And then it's not only noble, but brave. No subject is terrible if the story is true, if the prose is clean and honest, and if it affirms courage and grace under pressure.
You'll never write well if you fear dying. Do you?
Yeah, I do. I'd say it's probably, might be my greatest fear, actually.
Well, it's something all men before you have done, all men will do. I believe that love that is true and real creates a respite from death. All cowardice comes from not loving or not loving well, which is the same thing. And when the man who is brave and true looks death squarely in the face, like some rhino hunters I know, or Belmonte, who's truly brave, it is because they love with sufficient passion to push death out of their minds, until it returns as it does to all men. And then you must make really good love again. Think about it.
I think a woman is equal to a man in courage.
Who wants to fight?
Whew. It's hot. And he even calls out Gil. It's like he becomes a bit of a masculine mentor for Gil. You know, and Gil will get sort of passive, or he'll sort of, you know, downplay himself. He won't step into his confidence. And, you know, and Hemingway will be like, it's not manly.
Writers are competitive.
I'm not going to be competitive with you.
You're too self-effacing. It's not manly. If you're a writer, declare yourself the best writer. But you're not as long as I'm around, unless you want to put the gloves on and settle it.
No, I don't.
He'll just call him out on that stuff. And like he's almost like a mentor who's kind of guiding Gil into his masculine energy. I just love Hemingway in this movie. So then Gil meets Adriana, who is, well, she's having an affair with Pablo Picasso at the time. You find out she basically has affairs and fools around with all kinds of different artists and stuff. She's definitely a feminine character who just kind of flows with life. She goes from one relationship to another. She just likes to enjoy life, and artists want to paint her because she's such a beautiful muse. She's just such the epitome of like a feminine flow. She even says like that she's emotional. You know, she goes with her emotions and she flows with things. She's such a feminine character. Actually, when Gil first meets her, she ends up hearing a piece of Gil's writing, and she says to him that she's hooked. Like, she's immediately hooked. I mean, Gil just falls for her. Now, Gil has been in a relationship with a woman who has basically bashed everything that he does. You know what I mean? Like, who's constantly trashing him. There's nothing more attractive to the masculine than to have the feminine be supportive and encouraging and praise them for their passion and purpose. There's just nothing more attractive. And Gil 100% falls for Adrienne because of that. I mean, yes, she's beautiful. Yes, he's intoxicated by her. But it's her support of his purpose, of his dream, of his life. And he is so enamored with the fact that she is actually impressed by him, which you could say is from a place of ego, but Gil also has felt so suppressed. And having somebody who is like, yes, I believe in you. Like, who doesn't want that? You know what I mean? It's not coming necessarily from just an ego place. It's coming from more of a, this is what he's been craving, is somebody to actually believe in him. If you notice all of Gil's interactions with Adriana, his nervous system is so relaxed. He's so calm. He's not tense with her. He's just so, he's not disassociating. He's in the moment. When he's with Inez, he seems to always be disassociating because of the abuse, really. I mean, he's trying to pretend it's not happening. Whereas with Adriana, he's so present in the moment. He's living in the moment. He can actually be fully himself. He can enjoy the city. He has this really great speech about how he defines Paris, which actually, the way he defines his admiration for Paris could very well be a description of how the masculine would basically admire the feminine.
You know, I sometimes think, how's anyone ever going to come up with a book or a painting or a symphony or a sculpture that can compete with a great city? You can't, because like you look around, every street, every boulevard is its own special art form. And when you think that in, you know, the cold, violent, meaningless universe that Paris exists, these lights, I mean, come on, there's nothing happening on Jupiter or Neptune, but from way out in space, you can see these lights, the cafes, people drinking and singing. I mean, for all we know, Paris is the hottest spot in the universe.
It's almost as if Paris for him is a feminine energy, and it's something that he has been craving. He's been craving that kind of being able to relax and be present in the moment and fully be himself. He can be himself with Adriana. You know, he wants to give to her. He wants to compliment her. He wants to do things for her. He gives her earrings. He wants to do for her because she is such a feminine force. She's such a feminine presence that he is now stepping into more of his own masculine, which again is not like a tough guy masculine like you see in Hemingway. It's more of like a grounded, relaxed masculine energy of like, yes, I want to do for you because I want to be around you. And it's also not in that needy, like I want to impress her or you know, like a yes dear kind of thing. It's in like he just genuinely wants to give to her, to be around her, to see her, because of the feminine radiance and the energy that she's now bringing to his life, and she's letting him be himself and like step into his own energy, which is actually more masculine. He's discovering he's more grounded, he's less erratic, he's less confused about his direction. He's finding a direction, he's finding his purpose, he's working on his novel, he's working towards a goal, which is all very masculine energy. And of course Gil has to come to the realization at the end that obviously he's been in denial, and confronts Inez like I mentioned, and she just like gaslights him, and that's when the relationship dissolves. He decides he wants to stay in Paris because it's really what he's always wanted. And even though things don't work out with Adriana, because obviously they're from different time periods and she actually decides she wants to go back to an even further time period, it helps Gil come to the realization of the denial, of the fact that he's in a relationship that isn't satisfying, and actually gives him that direction, that purpose. It really makes him very grounded and decisive about what he wants to do with his life.
If you stay here though, and this becomes your present, then pretty soon you'll start imagining another time was really your, you know, was really the golden time. Yeah, that's, you know, what the present is. It's a little unsatisfying because life's a little unsatisfying.
That's the problem with writers. You are so full of words, but I am more emotional.
One of the biggest clues that a man has stepped into his masculine energy is that he has drive, he has passion and purpose. He has a clear direction of where he wants to go, and then he's very grounded and confident in that direction. And then you notice at the end of the film, Gil really has embodied a lot of those things. So he's really been able to step into his masculine, and in this particular situation, he really had to let things go in order to step into that, which were, you know, a partnership with somebody who really didn't really want him to step into his masculine in this particular situation. Many women who are in situations where they maybe say emasculating their partner are usually sometimes doing it because they want him to step into his masculine. You kind of get the impression that Inez didn't really want that. Inez really wanted him to stay a weaker partner so that she could be more controlling, which, you know, isn't a healthy dynamic at all. So that's why Gil really needed to like step into his strength and his confidence in order to let that situation go. There's so many characters in this movie and we could dig into so many different things, but that was kind of the gist of it. I love the whole aesthetic of this, the Paris, the 1920s, Hemingway, the whole thing. I just love this film. It's actually one of my favorite modern day films, although 2011 was actually quite a while ago, but you know, modern day movies. If you have any other topic requests or movies or TV shows you would like me to break down, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I love to hear from you. I love your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you would like to heal your own feminine energy, I have an online course called Feminine Radiance. The details will be in the description box below, along with links to all my social media if you would like to follow me there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.